Bitcoin is crashing right now. Are we going to see a 40% retracement like we've seen in the past? 2016, a major example and argument for a 40% retracement. Thus far, we are mimicking 2020 with this 18% pullback, but of course, we are pulling back a little bit deeper. So, we're going to be talking about this range in a lot of detail, this reaccumulation range, and generally this pre-halving retrace, which is the last bargain buying opportunity for Bitcoin in the pre-halving period. So subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future. Like this video if you enjoy content like this going forward, and let's dive right into it. So like we mentioned, 18% in total on this pre-halving retrace. We've seen 19% in 2020, and in 2016 we saw 29% as that conservative estimate from the top of the reaccumulation range high to the bottom of the reaccumulation range low. Of course, 40% is that outlying downside wick, which is 40% in total. Many people would like to just ignore it, which gives us generally this sort of range of 19% in total for a pre-halving retrace up to 29%. But of course, with pulling back price action like we're seeing right now, many people are going to be really stressing out about that potential 40% retrace taking place. Generally speaking, the thing to really take note of before we dive into those pre-halving tendencies is that this level here and this level here, that's your weekly range. And this is where price rejected in 2021, and then also later that year as well, from a candle bodied rejection. This was an upside wick rejection, and this is an upside wick rejection as well. Whereas here in this cycle, we're turning both of these levels of rejection into key support. And last week, or at least for the past few weeks, we were holding this range as a support, just consolidating between these two levels before breaking out and then rejecting from this old, or at least new, all-time high region. So it does come down to these key levels being that rejection zone, and we're seeing upside wicks forming a lower high. We're seeing these downside wicks forming the pre-halving retrace bottom for the time being, forming higher lows. So generally speaking, this is your cluster of price action to really be taking into account, with these levels being key reference points, denoting those key transition times. So you can see, for example, this old all-time high level rejected price into your pre-halving retrace, and then we broke beyond it, rejected here, and now trying to retest this old all-time high level as a support, but we're struggling for the time being. We're going to see a lot of downside volatility here, with this level being the rejection point in early 2021, and a rejection point in the candle bodies as well, being that rejection point. And for the time being, we're actually holding this in a volatile way, holding this support, producing downside wicks. So aggressive buy side premium buying behavior in these downside wicks. This is a key support to be watching out for, and it just brings us to this overall reaccumulation range. So the pre-halving retrace tends to occur in every cycle. You see that in 2020, you see that in 2016 as well, even in 2012, but we're not going to be talking about that period, because let's focus on this period where we're seeing reaccumulation following from that pre-halving retrace, reaccumulation following from that pre-halving retrace, and the pre-halving retrace gives us this reaccumulation range as well. So this last pre-halving retrace is the final bargain buying opportunity in the pre-halving period. Don't miss out on this period. We are 10 days away from the halving, roughly speaking, so really not much time left until the halving kicks in here. So this is the last pre-halving bargain buying opportunity for Bitcoin before we fully transition into this reaccumulation phase, if we haven't already. You can see that we have been accumulating here for a while now, and this is actually a generous period of reaccumulation in the pre-halving period. We don't always see that. 2020, we only had 2 weeks of reaccumulation before the halving, and most of that reaccumulation took place after the halving. In 2016, we had approximately 28 days before the halving where we saw this reaccumulation take place, but most of it took place after the halving. Here we're kind of seeing a generous portion of price action develop before the pre-halving period. It's going to stretch into the post-halving period for sure, but what if this is somehow 40% or 30% pre-halving and 70%, 60%? post-halving, we're always going to see a lot of post-halving reaccumulation, but in this cycle, perhaps this is going to be not evenly spread 50-50 pre-halving, 50 pre-halving, 50 post-halving, but maybe it's going to be 30 pre-halving, 70 post-halving reaccumulation, as opposed to, for instance, here, 90% of the reaccumulation took place after the halving, and only a small portion, a small fraction of it took place before. So these are the two key levels really to be paying attention to. We don't know exactly where the range low is. However, this 18% pre-halving retrace has hammered out a base for us to really give us an idea as to what that reference point is in terms of the base. And for the time being, it is going to be 6,600, with the top of this range, high reaccumulation range, being around 70k. We are upside wicking, like we talked about in this price action here on this chart. We're seeing clear upside wicks here, and they are at a lower high. Not too good of a sign, but that's just showcasing to us that 70k is a key level to really try and break out beyond. We are clustering here near the range highs. So what's interesting about this range for the time being is that we are seeing a sort of midpoint develop in between these two levels, in between the range high, in between the range low. We're seeing a midpoint of this range develop, and you can see that we are consolidating in the upper half of that range for the time being. And the thing with ranges is that if we lose this midpoint as a support, so if this is the 6,600 level and this is the 70k level, then the midpoint is going to be approximately 65k, right? If we lose this level as a support, as we've been holding and clustering in the upper half of this range, if we lose 65k as a support, we're going to actually revisit the bottom half of this reaccumulation range and start to develop a story here. Because at the moment, we are clustering at the top side of this range. What about the lower half of this range? If 65k gives way as a support, then we'll probably be clustering at the bottom half of this range. And let's try and understand how this would look like, because if you're focusing on this range right over here, we actually sinusoidally progress throughout the range, going to the downside, to the bottom of the range, to the top, to the bottom, to the top before breaking out, top, bottom, and then top again. So we're actually progressing in a sinusoidal S-like shaped way where we're just going to the top, bottom. Whereas here, we've only really just been clustering towards the top of that range, right? So we haven't really been seeing normal range bound price progression where we just go from top to bottom in a zigzagged way. But in 2016, we've seen a lot of that actually happen, going from top of the range to the bottom to the top, and then finally breaking out from it. And what's really interesting about this range is that actually we have 28 days before the halving managed to top out in this pre-halving retrace, beginning that retrace, that pre-halving retrace in total, but the very bottom of that retrace took place after the halving. What's interesting is that 30 days before the halving, so very similar to 2016, we actually managed that top for the pre-halving retrace, very similar to 2016. And what if we actually, like 2016, see the bottom half of that range get revisited after the halving, right? Because we were kind of holding the highs here and then progressed to the lower half of this range. So if you think about this being the midpoint for this reaccumulation range, we were in the top half of it pre-halving and we were in the bottom half of it post-halving. Really interesting to see that we are pre-halving in the upper half of this range. What if we're going to be in the bottom half of this range after the halving? And what's interesting about this is that we were actually at the top half of this range around 2020 as well, before rejecting after the halving and then progressing in a sinusoidal price action kind of way. So really interesting to see that whatever the cycle is, whatever we've achieved in this cycle thus far, and we've achieved quite a lot with new all-time highs before the halving for the first time ever, no matter how different the cycle is, we are seeing the pre-halving retrace, which occurs across every halving cycle. We're seeing the reaccumulation phase, which has occurred in the cycle, and perhaps this is really a great 2023-2024 period to really pay attention to, that we do see reaccumulation ranges form at every step in the process in this upward trajectory and upward price progression. We do see these reaccumulation ranges form, This is probably going to be our reaccumulation range. We don't exactly know where the bottom is, but let's say it's here. That's why this question mark here is, this question mark is here because we don't quite know where this bottom is, but for the time being, it does look like this is going to be that base, even if we do see some sort of downside wicking on a lesser extent, because this was a massive wick in 2016 when we take into account this reaccumulation range, downside wicking beyond here and then slinking back into the range. Well, if we see a smaller downside wick take place here after the halving when we retest this 6600 range, low reaccumulation range, and then slink back in there to enjoy range bound price progression. It's a possibility, but this is your roadmap. These reaccumulation ranges, they take time, they do form, they do take time to break out and proceed further upside. So this reaccumulation range developing right now at a time where we tend to see reaccumulation ranges develop across cycles anyway, that's very telling to us. And so with this pre-halving retrace period really transitioning us into the reaccumulation phase, if this pre-halving retrace is one of your final bargain buying opportunities in the pre-halving period, your reaccumulation phase, which continues from that, that's going to be your final bargain buying opportunity in the post-halving period before we embark on the parabolic upside period in the cycle that lays ahead still. So don't get discouraged, don't get disheartened. The bargain buying opportunities are running out. We're running out of time. So the fact that we are biding our time in terms of the price action just moving sideways, that's a great opportunity to be really looking for those opportunities before we finally take off into a parabolic rally, into price discovery, searching for new all-time highs. Thank you so much for watching today. Subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future. Like this video if you enjoy content like this going forward. I'm Rekt Capital, and I'll speak to you in the next one. Speak to you soon.